Good morning. How many of you enjoy watching movies? Some movies are pretty predictable, like the Titanic. I mean, we all know what's going to happen. But then other movies have a good plot twist. There's that part of the movie where you think, wow, I didn't see that coming. I watched a murder mystery movie called Knives Out over the weekend, and it had several moments in the movie where I was like, huh, I didn't see that coming. Well, today, as we finish up this series, we've been going through this book, You Were Made for This Moment, Courage for Today, Hope for Tomorrow by Max Lucado. And his book is about the book of Esther. And he has it broken up into three different acts. And if a person have never heard this story, it certainly has its plot twists and moments where it would leave you thinking, wow, I didn't see that coming. And so today, as we finish up the series, we're just going to kind of zoom through it. And Act 1 in his book, he titles Faith in a Faithless World. The events in the book of Esther took place during the rule of the Persian Empire. And the Persian kingdom was massive. And the Jews were scattered throughout the Persian kingdom. They'd been taken into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, and then the Persians took them over. Anyway, when King Cyrus of Persia came into power, he allowed the Jews to return to their homeland, and around 50,000 of them returned to Jerusalem. Others who had been exiled, though, remained. And two of our main characters in the book of Esther was Mordecai and Esther, and they were cousins. Esther was an orphan, and Mordecai had raised her since she was a child, and they were Jewish exiles that had stayed in Susa. And so as we went through the series, we talked about that Mordecai and Esther, they had become quite cozy in the kingdom of Persia. I mean, they both used Persian names. Mordecai worked in the citadel of Susa for King Xerxes, and Esther had become the queen. They kept their Jewish ancestry secret, and they had really blended into the fabric of the culture around them. Life was good for them. That is, it was, until a man named Haman became the number 2 guy in the kingdom of Persia. And King Xerxes had issued a decree that everyone was to bow down and honor Haman whenever he walked by the city gate. Well, Mordecai had a decision to make. Was he going to bow down and honor Haman? Was Mordecai going to stand out or blend in? And Mordecai chose to stand out. He refused to bow to Haman. And so as we went through the series, we talked about as Christians today, we all have the same decision to make. Are we going to blend into the culture around us, or are we going to stand out as followers of Jesus? Well, Haman was furious that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And when he discovered that Haman was a Jew, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai, and he looked for a way to kill all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Persia. And so Haman really kind of tricks King Xerxes into issuing a decree to kill all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A season of winter had come upon the Jews, and all hope seemed lost. But God's quiet providence was at work. And Max Lucado in his book says, when we feel that all is falling apart, God is working in our midst, causing everything to fall into place. He is the King of quiet providence. And he invites you and me to partner with him in his work. The major theme of the book of Esther is relief will come. Will you be a part of it? Are we going to stand out, or are we going to blend in? And then that leads us to Act 2, which in his book he titles that Courage in a Hostile Land. Mordecai and Esther found themselves in a you were made for this moment time in their lives. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went into the city wailing. And there was great mourning among the Jews in every province for which this order of the king had come. And Mordecai informs Esther what Haman has succeeded in accomplishing, and sends her a copy of the royal decree. And then Mordecai urges Queen Esther to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. And Esther sends a message back saying that everyone knows that anyone who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned is to be put to death unless the king extends his golden scepter. And it's been 30 days since he last summoned me. And then Mordecai sent this message back to Esther, and it's a pretty profound scripture. Esther 4:13 and 14. Do not think that because you are in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And so Mordecai is saying two things here. No one gets a free pass, not even the Queen of Persia. And the same is true for us. None of us get a free pass. We are all going to face difficult circumstances in our lives. We're all going to have seasons of winter. But the second thing that he says is relief and deliverance will come. You know, Jesus said in John 16:33, in this world, you're going to have trouble. You shouldn't be surprised by it. But then the rest of that verse says, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. And so we asked this question as we went through the series, what is your view of God? Does your view of God include relief and deliverance? Do you believe that God can bring relief and deliverance to whatever it is that you're going through? And then Esther responds to Mordecai with this message. Esther 4:16, she says, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther becomes a woman of God, determined to lead her people through a crisis. A woman who would demonstrate courage in a hostile land. But where did it start? It started with fasting and prayer. Before Esther approached the throne room of King Xerxes, she first approached the throne room of God. And when we are feeling desperate without options, we need to imitate Queen Esther. She chose fasting and prayer. You know, Hebrews 4:16 tells us, let us approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You know, we too can have courage in a hostile land because we know who is on the throne. And then that leads us to Act 3, the hand of God in the details of history. And last week we talked about divine providence. As Esther chapter 5 opens, Esther is robed in royalty, standing in the inner court of the palace, just close enough for the king to catch a glimpse of her. And when he saw the queen, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. And so Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king asked her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. And Esther's reply was for him and Haman to come to a dinner banquet that she had prepared for him. So the king and the Haman, they attended the banquet, they ate, they drank some wine, and the king asked her again, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you, even up to half the kingdom. And Esther replies, if I have found favor in your sight, let the king and Haman come to another banquet tomorrow. So Haman left on cloud 9. I mean, life was good. He was number 2 in the kingdom. He had been invited not to 1, but 2 exclusive banquets. Could life be any better? But then on his way home, he saw Mordecai sitting at the gate, and Mordecai refused to bow before him, and Haman was filled with rage. He went home and he called together his wife and his friends, and he boasted to them about his wealth, his many sons, and how the king had elevated him above everyone else, and I'm the only person Queen Esther's invited to a banquet. But then he says, I have no satisfaction in all this as long as Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate, refusing to bow to me. And so his wife and friends told him, set up gallows, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it, and then go to the banquet and enjoy yourself. So Haman delighted in the suggestion and had the gallows set up for in the morning. But then chapter 6 starts with King Xerxes unable to sleep that night. So he got up and he ordered the book of the Chronicles be brought and read to him. And it was found recorded that Mordecai had exposed two of the king's officers who were plotting to assassinate him. And King Xerxes says, "What honor did Mordecai receive for this?" And the attendant said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who's in the court?" And Haman had just entered to come speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on a pole that he had set up for him. I mean, it's the crack of dawn. Both men were in the palace with Mordecai on their minds. I mean, King Xerxes wants to honor him. Haman wants to kill him. And the king has Haman come in. And before Haman can even say anything, King Xerxes asks him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought Xerxes was talking about honoring him. And Haman said, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn and a horse that the king has ridden on, and robe the man in the king's robe that he delights to honor, and lead him on horse throughout the city, proclaiming, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. And then what happens next is one of those great God moments in the Bible. King Xerxes commands Haman, go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect to do anything that you have suggested. Wow. Could it get any better? I mean, just like that, a snap of your fingers, it becomes Mordecai Day in Susa. Haman intended to put Mordecai on a spike and kill him. Instead, he's putting Mordecai on a horse to honor him. Haman had planned to lead him to the gallows, and instead he is leading him through the streets of the city, proclaiming, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. I mean, can you imagine how humiliating that was for Haman? Haman goes home, his head covered in grief, and tells his wife and friends what had happened. Wow, I mean, who saw this coming? God did. Here we see divine providence. I mean, God orchestrated all the details. I mean, an exiled Jewish orphan becoming queen of Persia, an exiled Jew Mordecai working in the citadel, overhearing and reporting a plot to assassinate the king, Queen Esther at the first banquet discerning that the timing just wasn't right and asking for a second banquet, a sleepless king ordering the reading of the Chronicles in the middle of the night, and the entry about Mordecai being read to the king that very night, and Haman being the first one in the court early the next morning. Who could do all this but the divine controller of all things? God was at work, and he is still at work. Do you think that the odds are against you? If so, consider the plight of Haman and Mordecai. God flip-flopped their stories. Haman began the day large and in charge. Mordecai began the day in sackcloth and ashes. Yet in a moment, Haman is humiliated and Mordecai is honored. Haman's plan to kill Mordecai and annihilate all the Jews was no match for divine providence. Whatever it is that you're going through, know this, God is at work. Max Lucado in his book says, when the world seems off the rails, hold fast to this truth. Butterfly wings don't determine the course of history. God does. He did in the days of Esther, and he still does today. Man, Haman was a wicked man. But Haman's reign of terror on the Jewish people was about to come to an end in the dining hall of King Xerxes. So the next day, King Xerxes and Haman, they attend Queen Esther's banquet, and as they're eating and drinking wine, the king asks Queen Esther again, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom. And then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have kept quiet, and I would not have disturbed the king. And then the king asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? And Esther says, your adversary and your enemy is this vile Haman. And then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. King Xerxes gets up in a rage and storms out into the palace garden. Haman stayed behind and threw himself on the couch where Esther was reclining, begging for mercy. And then when King Xerxes returned and saw Haman falling on the couch where Esther was reclining, he says, "Will you even molest the queen while she's with me in my house?" And they seized Haman and they covered his face. The attendant told told the king that Haman had set up a pole for Mordecai, Mordecai who spoke up to help the king, and the king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Divine providence. Max Lucado says a couple things in his book that I really like. One of them is this: our God is a just God. Nothing escapes him. No one escapes him. The wicked will not win. And then he also says it is right to declare God's goodness, but it is a mistake to dismiss God's justice. Guys, the Lord is gracious to those who trust him, but he's going to punish those who dismiss him. Our God does not turn a blind eye to rebellion and acts of hostility. Acts 17:31 says, "He has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he has given proof to this to everyone by raising him from the dead." Guys, God has set the day, and no one knows the day or the time, not even the angels in heaven. But be assured of this, the day is coming when Jesus will judge the world. And in the meantime, we have kingdom work to do. We silence the Hamans of the world through acts of kindness and love. Guys, our God is the God of great turnarounds. And so as we spend the rest of our time here finishing this up, I want to start by reading Esther chapter 9, verse 1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the decree commanded by the king was to be carried out. And on this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But now the tables were turned, and the Jews got an upper hand over those who hated them. Other translations read, the exact opposite happened. The reverse occurred. It turned out to the contrary. Our God is the God of great turnarounds. And I am certain that Haman and all the enemies of the Jews had that moment where they thought, I didn't see that coming. And man, there are a lot of those moments in the book of Esther. In Esther chapter 8, Haman is dead. King Xerxes gives Queen Esther the estate of Haman. Mordecai comes into the presence of the king, as Esther had told the king that they were cousins. The king took his ring that he had given to Haman, and now he gives it to Mordecai. Esther appoints Mordecai over Haman's estate. The reversals just continue to stack up. But the Jews were still under a death sentence. And again, Esther pleads with the king. But in that culture, in that time, the king could not undo a decree that he had made. So this is what King Xerxes does. He amends the law. He tells Esther and Mordecai to write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews, granting the Jews the right to assemble and to defend themselves. And this decree was sent out in the 3rd month, which gave the Jews 9 months to prepare. And then on the day that Haman had chosen by casting lots, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, that was the day Haman had decided to have the Jews destroyed. The exact opposite happened. The Jews were attacked by their enemies on that day, but the Jews were prepared, and the Jews killed 75,000 men who attacked them. Haman's reign of terror came to an end. Haman and his family were destroyed, and Mordecai, the Jew, was elevated to number 2 in the kingdom of Persia. Plot twist. Mordecai went from blending in to standing out by refusing to bow to Haman. Esther spent 3 days fasting and praying that resulted in her being courageous. Esther told the king what Haman intended to do, and Haman went from being second in command to being impaled on a stake. Mordecai went from sackcloth and ashes to wearing the king's robes and being elevated to second in command. And then look at the difference between Esther chapter 4, verse 3 and Esther chapter 8, verse 16. Esther 4:3 says, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. But then we look just a few chapters later, Esther 8:16. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. What chapter in Esther's story do you find yourself in? Maybe you're in the 4th chapter. Your days are marked by mourning and weeping. Maybe an illness has taken its toll on you. Perhaps sorrow has taken your joy. The struggles and disappointments of life have left you just so very tired. And if that's you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're going through a season of winter in your life. But I urge you, don't give into despair. Don't give up. Our God is the God of great turnarounds. I mean, look at all these examples in the Bible. Abraham and Sarah were old and barren one day and pregnant the next. Joseph was an Egyptian prisoner one day and an Egyptian prime minister the next. The Red Sea was uncrossable one minute and completely dry and crossable the next. The walls of Jericho were standing one minute and were complete rubble the next. Goliath defied Israel for 40 days, and in a moment, a shepherd boy named David killed him. 450 prophets of Baal mocked the God of Israel. But when Elijah prayed, in a moment, fire fell from heaven, and the prophets of Baal were put to death. Lions wanted to eat Daniel, but in a moment, God shut the mouths of the lions. Guys, in God's hands, no script is predictable, and no outcome is certain. I mean, look at a barn in Bethlehem. Who saw that coming? Who saw him coming? The Son of God, the Savior of the world, sleeping in a feeding trough. And then the greatest reversal in history occurred in a tomb just outside Jerusalem. I mean, Jesus was dead. And he lay dead for 3 days. He was in a tomb. No breath, no hope. His disciples who had left everything to follow Jesus, they left their fishing nets, they left their tax collector boots, they left it all, and now their world was broken, their hearts were broken, they were scattered, they were living and hiding, and all hope seemed lost. But that all changed 3 days later. Jesus stood up in that tomb, and he stepped squarely on the head of Satan. Satan had struck his heel when Jesus was crucified, but when Jesus was triumphant over death, he smashed Satan's head, and in a moment, the tables were turned. In Luke 24, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Guys, our God is the God of great turnarounds, and nothing or no one is beyond the influence of God. So whatever you're going through, keep praying, keep trusting. Your story is not finished. In his book, Max Lucado says, no struggle means no strength. No mountain means no mountain peak. No setback means no comeback. This is the anthem of the story of Esther. Relief will come. That was Mordecai's message to Esther, and that is God's message for each of us. Don't measure the height of the mountain. Ponder the power of the one who made the mountain. Don't tell God how big your storm is. Tell the storm how big your God is. Now think about our scripture that we're going to be reading at church this morning. It's from Isaiah chapter 40. It says, to whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look at the heavens. Who created all these? He brings out the starry host one by one, and he calls each of them by name. Because of his great power and strength, not a single one of them is missing. So why do you complain? Why do you say that my way is hidden from the Lord? That my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard that the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth? He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. And the verses 29 through 31 says, he gives strength to the weary, and he increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength, and they will soar on wings like eagles, and they will run and not become weary, and they will walk and not be faint. Guys, God not only has the strength, but he distributes that strength to his people. And the criteria given here for receiving God's strength is not being young. It's given to those who trust in the Lord. Max Lucado in his book says, the next time you feel the weight of the world, talk to the one who made the world. You know, as our perception of God grows greater, the size of our challenge will grow smaller. I just want to close with this. You know, the story of Esther reminds us that God may seem hidden, but he is active. He brings life out of broken things. He is the God of quiet providence. He is the God of great turnarounds. He is the God who will bring relief and deliverance. Our entire world seems to be in a constant state of trauma. And the world needs us. It needs people with the resolve of Mordecai. It needs people with the courage of Esther. The world is in desperate need of people who will stay steady in the chaos. At the end of his book, Max Lucado writes, bombs are still dropped. Worlds still explode. Walls still collapse. Pandemics still rage. But in the midst of it all, the Lord still has his people. And when they proclaim the truth of God in the middle of a crumbling world, you never know who might be changed. We were made for this moment. God bless and have a good day.